The bay door stood open on a gray Michigan afternoon, and the crowd around the Sanders lot had gone quiet. Under the shop light sat a 1967 Shelby GT 500, its hood raised, its silence louder than any engine could have been. A reporter pushed forward, phone raised. A millionaire offered $500,000 for anyone who could fix her late father's car, he said. What do you want for it? Travis Sullivan wiped his hands on a rag and didn't look up. $15. No one laughed. Emily Sanders just stared at him, and for the first time in 8 months, she didn't say anything at all. What would $15 mean to you if it were the only number that told the truth? Keep that question in mind. It matters more than the $500,000 ever will. 3 weeks before that afternoon, the Sanders Legacy Motors lot had been a different kind of crowded. Trucks with magnetic decals. Men in polo shirts with company logos, carrying diagnostic laptops like briefcases. Each one had knelt in front of the Shelby, opened the hood, run a scan, and come up with a different guess. A bad ignition module. A failing transmission control unit. A wiring fault somewhere in the harness that nobody wanted to chase because chasing it meant tearing the car apart to find nothing. Owen Pratt watched all of it from just inside the garage doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing. He was 61 years old, gray at the temples, with hands that had spent 40 years inside engines. He was the shop foreman at Sanders Legacy Motors, had been for 4 years, and before that he had spent a long stretch of his working life somewhere he didn't talk about anymore. He watched the third expert leave with his equipment and his excuses, and something in the back of his mind kept turning over. He'd seen that kind of fault pattern before, once, a long time ago. Across town, in a house with a chain-link fence and a swing set gone quiet for the winter, Travis Sullivan was making grilled cheese sandwiches while his son did homework at the kitchen table. Dad, is a hexagon a polygon? Everything's a polygon if it's got straight sides, bud. Sam Sullivan was 8 years old, missing a front tooth, and completely unbothered by the fact that his father had, an hour earlier, come home smelling like brake cleaner and said nothing about his day, same as always. That was how it worked in their house. Travis didn't bring the shop home, and Sam didn't ask. It wasn't a rule either of them had spoken out loud. It was just how the evenings went, plates on the table, math homework, the television low in the other room. Travis flipped a sandwich and glanced at the calendar on the fridge, a school field trip circled in red marker, and felt the particular ordinary satisfaction of a Tuesday that had gone exactly as planned. Outside, the porch light buzzed on its timer, and somewhere down the block a dog barked twice and quit. This was the whole shape of his life now, small and steady, and most nights he was grateful enough for it that he didn't let himself wonder what he'd traded to get it. The knock on the garage door came the next morning before Travis had even unlocked the front bay. Owen stood there in a canvas jacket, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who had talked himself into something on the drive over and was already regretting it a little. He didn't say hello. "There's a car," he said, "over at Sanders. Nobody can figure out what's wrong with it. I think you might be able to." Travis set down his coffee. "I don't do house calls for millionaires, Owen." "I know what you don't do." Owen looked at him steadily. "I also know what you used to be good at. I've got a bad feeling about this one, and there's nobody else I trust to look at it without making it worse." It was the way he said it, not flattery, just plain fact, delivered by the one man from Travis's old life who had never once treated him like a cautionary tale that got through. Travis wiped his hands on the rag hanging from his belt loop, slow, thinking it over. Owen had never asked him for anything. Not once, in 4 years. "One look," Travis said. "That's all I'm promising." Owen nodded, like that was more than he'd expected, and didn't say anything else the whole drive over. The Sanders lot smelled like fresh asphalt and cut grass, and Travis felt distinctly out of place in his work boots among the polished trucks and the company banners still strung up from the last failed attempt. Owen led him straight to the bay where the Shelby sat under work lights, hood already up, exposed like a patient mid-surgery. Travis stopped 3 feet from the engine and didn't touch anything. He just looked. His eyes moved along the firewall, down past the intake, following a run of wiring tucked behind the master cylinder, wiring that had clearly been rerouted at some point by somebody who knew exactly what they were doing. He knew in about 4 seconds more than the last 3 specialists had figured out in 3 weeks. He didn't say so. A woman was standing near the toolbox, arms wrapped around herself against the morning cold, watching him with an expression somewhere between exhaustion and wary hope. She didn't introduce herself with a title. "You're the mechanic Owen mentioned," she said. "Travis." "Emily." She glanced at the car, then back at him. "Everyone who's looked at this so far told me something different. I stopped trusting any of it about a week ago. I haven't told you anything yet." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile. "No, you haven't." Travis crouched down beside the wheel well and reached toward the wiring harness, and for a half-second his hand stopped in midair, hovering over a splice job that was unmistakably, precisely his own. A routing pattern he hadn't laid eyes on in over a decade. He knew the twist of that wire like he knew his own signature. Behind them, in the small office off the garage, Owen had gone to pull the car's service file, and in doing so, had left a folder open on the desk, old paperwork from a restoration job dated 12 years back, a job order stamped with the name of a company that didn't exist under that name anymore. Nobody in the room read it, but it sat there, open, waiting for someone to. Travis straightened up, jaw tight, and said only, "I need more time with it." Something in his chest had gone tender in a way that had nothing to do with the car. 12 years. He'd been a different man then, a man with a wife who used to bring him coffee in this same kind of morning cold, before the accident that took her, before any of the rest of it. He hadn't expected an old harness to be the thing that reached backward and touched that. Emily watched him go quiet and didn't ask why. She had learned, over the last 8 months, not to push at silences that weren't hers. She'd seen enough of them in the mirror. "You looked at that wire like it said something to you," she said. Careful, not quite a question. "Old habit," Travis said. "You spend enough years around engines, they start to feel like handwriting. You can tell who did the work, without ever meeting them. And this handwriting says what?" He almost told her then. The name sat right behind his teeth. "Take whatever time you need," she said instead, before he had to answer, and something in him was grateful for the out even as it cost him something to take it. Travis nodded and didn't tell her the truth. Not because he was hiding it from her. There simply hadn't been a single moment yet that had asked him to. He drove home that night thinking about a folder he hadn't opened, a wire he hadn't expected to recognize, and a question he wasn't ready to answer even for himself. Why, out of every mechanic in the state, had this exact car ended up in front of him? By the second morning, Travis was under the Shelby with a drop light clipped to his belt, and Owen handing him tools without being asked. The two of them working the way men do when the years between them fold up small and disappear. Travis traced the harness inch by inch, checking every splice against his own memory of a job he'd done when he was 23 years old, and still believed the industry rewarded doing things right. Walter Kane showed up at 9 sharp, trailed by a photographer from the local business paper, and made a show of clapping Travis on the shoulder like they were old friends. "How's our mystery mechanic doing?" Kane said, loud enough for the camera. He was in his 50s, silver-haired, dressed like a man who had never once gotten grease under his fingernails and never intended to. "We'd love to have this wrapped up by the weekend. Good for the story, good for everybody." "It'll take as long as it takes," Travis said, not looking up from the wheel well. Kane's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. He glanced at his watch, said something about a board meeting, and left without waiting for a response. Emily watched the exchange from the office doorway, arms crossed, and felt a small flicker of something she couldn't name yet. Kane had been telling her for months that the car was a lost cause, that the whole contest was mostly good publicity, and she shouldn't get her hopes up. He'd never once said it like a man who wanted her to succeed. She crossed the lot and crouched near the toolbox, close enough to talk without an audience. "Is it fixable?" "Everything's fixable," Travis said. "Question is whether it's worth what it costs to fix it right versus what it costs to fix it fast." "My father never did anything fast." Travis glanced at her, just briefly. "Then I won't either." That afternoon, Sam showed up after school, backpack slung over one shoulder, and settled onto an overturned bucket near the workbench to do his reading homework while his father worked. Nobody asked him to be quiet. He just was, the way kids get when a space feels safe enough to disappear into. Emily, passing through the garage with a stack of paperwork, paused at the sight of him. You must be the reason he leaves at 5 on the dot, she said. Sam looked up. He makes grilled cheese on Tuesdays. That's a good reason. Travis, from underneath the car, said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved in a way Sam had learned meant his father was pleased. Near 6, with the shop emptying out and Owen locking the far bay, Travis finally got his hands on the relay, buried deep behind the harness junction, the one component nobody else had thought to pull because it looked, on the surface, factory original. He turned it over under the drop light and felt his stomach tighten. The casing was wrong, not damaged, replaced. A newer part, dressed up to look period correct, soldered in with a hand that wasn't careful, wasn't trained, wasn't him. This hadn't failed on its own. Owen came around the fender and looked over his shoulder, and for a moment the two of them just stared at the small piece of plastic and metal like it might explain itself. That what I think it is? Owen said. Depends what you think it is. Somebody put that there. Travis turned the part over one more time in the light. Yeah, he said quietly. Somebody did. The relay sat in a small plastic bag on Travis's workbench for 2 full days before he said anything to anyone, because saying something meant admitting he'd been looking for reasons not to. He'd traced the part number back through 3 supplier catalogs and found what he expected. It was a cheap aftermarket substitute, worth about $15 retail, dressed up with a factory-style casing to pass a glance. Whoever installed it hadn't cared whether it worked long-term. They'd cared that it would fail, eventually, quietly, in a way that looked like age instead of sabotage. He brought it to Emily's office on a Thursday afternoon, set the bag on her desk, and let her look at it without saying anything first. This is what's been wrong with the car, he said. Somebody put a bad part in on purpose, recently enough that it doesn't match the rest of the restoration work. Emily picked up the bag and turned it over the way he had, like the object might weigh more than it looked. Recently? How recently? Best guess. Over a year ago. Maybe more. She set it down slowly. My father's been dead 8 months. I know. The office went quiet except for the hum of the space heater in the corner. Emily walked to the window that looked out over the lot, over the Shelby still sitting under its work lights, and Travis watched her shoulders draw in, like she was holding something together by will alone. He built this company from a 2-bay garage in 1981, she said, not turning around. He used to say the cars were the easy part, people were the hard part. I didn't understand what he meant until he was gone, and I had a boardroom full of people telling me what he would have wanted. What do they want? Officially? To honor his memory with a public event. Her voice went flat. Unofficially, I think some of them want proof that this company can't fix its own history anymore, that we're better off being folded into somebody bigger. Travis didn't say anything to that. He didn't need to ask who some of them meant. He'd watched Walter Kane's face for 2 days now, the practiced warmth that never once reached his eyes. 2 floors up, behind a closed conference room door, Walter Kane sat across from a man in a gray suit who represented a national holding company and spoke in the low, efficient tone of somebody finishing a conversation they'd been having for months. The vote's close, Kane said. But if this car stays broken through Saturday, close enough turns into a landslide. Nobody backs a legacy brand that can't fix its own flagship. And after the sale? Kane allowed himself the smallest smile. After the sale, I run the combined operation. That was always the arrangement. Neither man said Richard Sanders' name. They didn't have to. Back in the garage that evening, Travis sat alone after Owen had gone home, turning the relay over in his fingers under the drop light, weighing what he knew against what he could prove. A part like this didn't install itself. Somebody with access to this car, this garage, this company, had made a choice a year or more ago, and that choice had cost Richard Sanders' daughter 8 months of grief, stacked on top of grief. He wasn't ready to say a name yet. He didn't have enough to hang one on. He put the relay back in its bag, locked it in his toolbox, and told himself he'd wait until he was certain. The garage at night had a different quality of quiet than the garage during the day, less hum, more shadow, and Emily had gotten into the habit of showing up around 8 with 2 coffees, setting one on the workbench without asking if he wanted it, the way you'd leave water out for a cat that hadn't decided yet whether it trusted you. You don't have to keep doing this, Travis said one evening, not looking up from the intake manifold. I know. She sat on the wheeled stool across from him, cup cradled in both hands. I like it out here. It's the only place on this whole property nobody's asking me to make a decision. I could ask you to hand me the 9/16. That's not a decision. That's a favor. She passed him the wrench. They talked, some nights, about nothing that mattered and everything that did a movie she'd seen twice because the theater was the only place she could cry without an audience, a fishing trip he used to take before Sam was born, the particular ache of a house that used to have 2 names on the mailbox and now only had 1. Neither of them asked the other what they did before this. It wasn't avoidance. The question simply never had a doorway to walk through. You didn't ask a man fixing your car what he used to do for a living any more than you'd ask a stranger holding an umbrella over you in the rain what he studied in college. The moment wasn't built for it. Sam came by more often now, drawn by the novelty of a woman who asked him real questions and actually waited for the answers. One evening, Emily brought him a die-cast model of the very Shelby, sitting 3 feet away, found in a box of her father's old promotional giveaways, and Sam held it like it was made of glass. Is this the same car? Same car. Smaller version. Dad's gonna fix the real one. I think he might. Owen watched all of this from the far bay, wrench in hand, unmoving for longer than the job in front of him required. He'd known Travis Sullivan for going on 15 years now, across 2 very different chapters of both their lives, and he had never once seen the man's shoulders sit this loose. It should have made Owen glad. Instead, it made the folder sitting in his desk drawer feel heavier every day he didn't mention it. He thought about his own son, a grown man now, 3 states away, who hadn't called on Father's Day this year or the year before. Owen had gone quiet once, a long time ago, when speaking up would have cost him something, and the silence had cost him more than he'd ever gotten back. He watched Sam Sullivan laugh at something Emily said, and felt that old debt come due. Late that night, alone in the garage after Emily and Sam had both gone, Travis pulled up the supplier order history on the shop's ancient desktop computer, searching for any record of a replacement relay purchased for this specific vehicle. He found one. A single line item, buried in a spreadsheet of hundreds, an internal purchase order number that didn't match the vendor code for any authorized restoration supplier Sanders Legacy Motors had ever used. He wrote the number down on the back of a receipt and sat looking at it for a long moment, the cursor blinking on the screen, 1 click away from whatever it would tell him next. He didn't click. Owen found Travis the next morning before either of them had said a word to anyone else, standing just inside the garage door with a manila folder held against his chest like it might try to get away from him. I should have told you the first day, Owen said. I saw the file. I know you know. Travis didn't pretend not to understand. You worked at Ironclad too, 22 years. I hired you when you were 21 and thought you were smarter than anybody with that much confidence had a right to be. Owen's jaw worked. I watched what they did to you when the new ownership came in. I watched you refuse to sign off on that inspection, and I watched them push you out the side door for it, and I said nothing, not one word, because I had 4 years left to my pension and I was scared. I never blamed you for that. You should have. Owen set the folder on the workbench and opened it. Inside was a purchase order, dated 16 months earlier, authorization signature scrawled at the bottom in handwriting. Travis recognized instantly from 100 meetings he used to sit through. I pulled this last night. Same purchase order number you were about to look up yourself. Kane authorized it personally, not through procurement. Direct override, flagged as an emergency part swap on a private vehicle. Travis picked up the paper and read it twice. Your father-in-law, Owen said, catching himself. Sorry, her father. He was still alive when this was ordered. The math landed heavy in the room. 16 months back put this a full 8 months before Richard Sanders died. Somebody had sabotaged this car while its owner was still driving it, still walking through this exact garage, still making decisions that stood between Walter Kane and everything Kane wanted. Travis thought about the day he'd been walked out of Ironclad, escorted past men he'd trained, treated like a liability instead of a man who'd refused to put his name on something dangerous. He thought about how certain kinds of men only ever protected one thing, and it was never the truth. You ever wonder what would have happened if I just signed it, Travis said, the inspection. Every day for 5 years. Owen didn't look away from him. Then I stopped wondering, because it stopped mattering. You did the hard thing. I did the easy one. I don't get to pretend those came out even. They didn't ask you to sign anything, Owen. No, they just needed me to stay quiet while somebody else did. Owen closed the folder. I'm done being the man who stays quiet. Sam's laugh drifted in from the office, where Emily had let him help sort a drawer of old keychains, and Owen glanced toward the sound before he spoke again. Quieter now. I've got a boy of my own. Haven't heard his voice in going on 2 years. I watched that kid in there laugh at something you said last week, and I thought I already know what silence costs. I'm not doing it again. Travis folded the purchase order carefully and put it with the relay in his toolbox, the pieces of something whole now instead of scattered. She doesn't know any of this yet, he said. No, she doesn't. Then we make sure the next person who tells her is the truth, laid out complete, not a rumor with holes in it. Travis closed the toolbox and looked at Owen with something that wasn't quite forgiveness and wasn't quite gratitude, but sat somewhere close to both. There's a board meeting Saturday. There is. Then we've got 3 days to make sure this can't be argued with. The Sanders Legacy Motors boardroom on Saturday morning was full in a way it hadn't been in months, every chair occupied, standing room along the back wall, because word had gotten out that the mystery mechanic had finished the car, and everyone wanted to see whether the story ended the way the newspapers had already started writing it. Walter Kane stood at the head of the table in a fresh suit, a slide deck queued up behind him with charts about market consolidation and operating efficiency, ready to pivot the moment the car conversation went the wrong way for him. Emily sat at the far end, and when Travis walked in with Owen a half step behind him, she gave him a small nod. No idea yet what was about to happen, only trusting that whatever it was, he wouldn't have asked for this meeting without reason. The car runs, Travis said. No preamble. Started it myself this morning. Every system in spec. A ripple went through the room. Kane's smile came up fast and practiced. Well, that's wonderful news for the family. And frankly, wonderful news for this company's story going forward. It's also not a story about a mystery, Travis said, cutting through it. It's a story about a part that was swapped out 16 months ago, on purpose, by somebody with the authority to override procurement without anyone asking questions. The room went still. Owen stepped forward and laid the purchase order on the conference table, sliding it toward the center, where every board member could see the signature at the bottom. This authorization bypassed standard procedure. It was flagged as an emergency repair on a personal vehicle. I pulled it from our own archive last night. Emily rose halfway out of her chair, reading the page upside down from where she sat, and when she found the name at the bottom, her face changed in a way that made the whole room go quieter still. Walter. Her voice was very even, very controlled, the voice of someone holding a great deal back. You did this while my father was alive. Kane's composure finally cracked, just at the edges. Emily, I can explain the context. You sabotaged his car. She wasn't shouting. It was worse than shouting. You've spent 8 months letting me believe I couldn't hold on to what he built, so I'd hand it to whoever you'd already promised to run it for. This company needs modernization that sentiment alone can't. That's not your decision to frame for me anymore. She turned to the room, to the board members shifting in their seats, unwilling now to meet Kane's eyes. I move that Walter Kane be suspended from his position, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. The vote, when it came, wasn't close. Hands went up around the table in a wave that left Kane standing alone at the head of it, the slide deck behind him still glowing with numbers nobody was looking at anymore. Security was called, quiet and procedural. And Kane was walked out through the same lobby where, 3 weeks earlier, he'd posed for photographs promising the board a bright, efficient future. In the sudden hush that followed, Emily crossed the room to where Travis stood, and for a long moment neither of them said anything about the meeting, the vote, or Kane at all. You knew this whole time, she said. About the part. How long? Long enough to make sure I could prove it before I said it. She studied him, something in her expression shifting, recalibrating, looking at him the way you look at a photograph you've walked past 100 times and only just noticed was hung slightly crooked. Who are you, Travis Sullivan? He didn't have a clever answer ready. Somebody who used to know a lot more about cars like this than a shop like mine would suggest. It wasn't the whole truth yet, but for the first time, it was the beginning of one, spoken out loud in a room that had just watched the last of the lies get carried out the door. Emily found him 3 evenings later, after the board's official statement had gone out, after the reporters had gotten their quotes and gone home, after the noise of it all had finally thinned into something quieter. The garage was empty except for the drop light and the Shelby, engine ticking as it cooled from a test drive. She didn't ask him anything at first. She just sat down on the same wheeled stool she'd claimed most evenings for 2 weeks now, and let the silence hold what it needed to. "Owen told me the rest of it," she said eventually, ironclad. "The inspection you wouldn't sign, what it cost you. I figured he would. I'm not asking you to explain it again." She wrapped her hands around a coffee she hadn't drunk from yet. "I just wanted you to know I heard it. All of it." Travis leaned against the workbench, arms crossed, looking at the car instead of at her, because some things were easier said sideways. "I built the harness on this car 12 years ago, back when I still believed doing the work right was the whole job. I didn't know it was your father's car until I had my hands back inside it." "He mentioned you once," Emily said slowly, like she was reaching for a memory she hadn't looked at in years. "Not by name. He came home from Ironclad talking about some young engineer who'd argued with him over a spec change, wouldn't budge, turned out to be right. He brought it up for years afterward, whenever somebody tried to cut a corner around here. Find me the guy who argued with me about the spec." Travis felt something settle in his chest, heavy and warm at once. "I don't remember arguing with anybody important." "He wasn't important to you yet." Emily smiled, small and real. "You were important to him for over a decade, and you never knew it." Sam wandered in around then, having let himself through the side door the way he always did, backpack sliding off one shoulder, announcing that he was starving in the universal tone of 8-year-olds everywhere. Travis pulled a bag of sandwiches from the mini fridge he kept for exactly this reason, and the three of them ended up sitting on overturned buckets and a rolling stool, eating grilled cheese cut into triangles, under work lights that hummed low and steady above them. Nobody said anything about what was growing between the two adults in the room. Nobody needed to. Sam talked about a book report. Emily asked follow-up questions like she actually wanted the answers, and Travis watched the two of them together and felt, for the first time in a long time, like his ordinary life and the part of himself he'd buried might not have to stay separate anymore. "You're not eating the crusts," Emily told Sam, nodding at his plate. "Dad says the crusts are optional." "Dad's wrong. The crusts are the best part." She took one off his plate without asking and ate it herself, and Sam laughed so hard he nearly fell off the bucket, and Travis found himself laughing too, quiet and unguarded, in a way he couldn't remember doing in this garage before tonight. When Sam finally dozed off against a stack of folded shop towels, Emily helped Travis carry him out to the truck, and for a moment, before he climbed in to drive his son home, they stood close in the cold, saying nothing, the space between them smaller than it had been an hour before. A week later, a courier delivered 3 boxes from Sanders Legacy Motors' corporate office to Emily's house. The last of her father's personal effects finally released from storage after the investigation into Kane's conduct wrapped its initial phase. Emily sat on her living room floor that evening and went through them alone, folders of old correspondence, a stack of trade magazines, and at the bottom of the last box, a leather notebook she didn't remember ever seeing before. She opened it to a page dated 12 years back, her father's handwriting, cramped and slanted the way it always got when he was writing fast, excited about something. "Met the engineer who did the harness work on the Shelby today, 23 years old, argued with 3 senior staff about a spec change, and turned out to be dead right. Told him I'd remember his name. I did." Further in, a much later entry, dated the year Travis left Ironclad, heard through the restoration circuit that Ironclad let the harness engineer go over a safety dispute. Damn shame. Man like that is worth 10 of the ones who stay quiet. Emily read it 3 times, then closed the notebook and sat with it in her lap for a long while, understanding finally the shape of something her father had seen coming a decade before she ever met the man who'd earned it. She thought about all the times her father had said that phrase around the dinner table growing up, "Find me the guy who argued about the spec," half a joke by the time she was old enough to hear it, and how she'd never once thought to ask who he meant. She called Travis that night, later than was probably polite, and read him the first entry over the phone without any preamble at all. There was a long pause on the other end before he spoke. "He remembered that," Travis said finally. "After everything, he remembered that. He remembered you, Emily said, for 12 years. I just needed to catch up. The board's formal action against Kane came through that same week: termination, forfeiture of severance, a referral to the district attorney's office for the falsified procurement records. Owen was reinstated as head of restoration operations with a raise nobody argued against. Emily, now holding controlling authority exactly as her father's estate had always intended, called Travis into the office one last time. "The 500,000 is yours," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Board approved, no conditions. You earned every dollar of it twice over." Travis didn't open the folder. "I already told you what I wanted." Travis. $15, he said. "That's what I quoted for the job before I knew whose car it was, or what was really wrong with it. Changing the number now because it turned out to matter more than I thought would make the number about me. It was never supposed to be about me." Emily studied him for a long moment, then reached into her desk drawer and pulled out an envelope, counted out 3 fives, and pushed them across the desk toward him with a steadiness that didn't quite match the look on her face. $15, she said, "for the best repair job this company has ever paid for." Their hands met over the desk when he took it, longer than the transaction required, and neither of them pulled away first. 6 weeks later, the sign above Travis's garage read differently than it had all spring: Sullivan Restoration, in partnership with Sanders Legacy Motors, freshly painted, still smelling faintly of solvent. 2 new lifts had gone in where there used to be one, and Owen split his week between both locations, training a pair of apprentices who treated him like the legend Travis had always known he was. Emily came by most afternoons now, sometimes with paperwork, more often without any excuse at all. Sam had taken to calling her by name instead of any title, and she'd taken to picking him up from school on the days Travis had his hands too deep in an engine to leave, an arrangement none of them had ever formally discussed, and all of them had simply started living inside. On the nights she stayed for dinner, she set the table without being asked, and Sam had started leaving a 4th chair, pulled out even on nights she wasn't coming, like he expected her to show up anyway. More often than not, she did. Owen had taken to calling the new setup the family business, half joking, though nobody bothered correcting him. He'd started sending his son letters again, short ones. Nothing that demanded a reply, just news about the shop and a photograph or two. He hadn't heard back yet. He kept sending them anyway. On a bright Saturday in early autumn, Sanders Legacy Motors held a memorial exhibition for Richard Sanders in the main showroom. The 1967 Shelby GT 500 parked center stage under soft white light, polished to a shine it hadn't worn in years. A small brass plaque sat on an easel beside it. "Restored by Travis Sullivan. $15. People stopped to read it, tilted their heads. Some of them laughed a little, not unkindly, the way people laugh at a number that doesn't make sense until you understand the whole story behind it. A few of them recognized Travis from the newspaper photos and shook his hand, and he answered their questions, the same plain way he answered everything, without dressing it up for the room. Owen stood near the entrance most of the afternoon, greeting old colleagues from a life he'd stopped mentioning years ago, standing a little straighter than usual in a borrowed sport coat. At one point he caught Travis's eye across the showroom and gave him a short nod, the kind 2 men give each other when there's nothing left that needs saying out loud. Emily stood beside Travis near the back of the room, Sam between them holding the die-cast model in one hand, and for a while none of them said anything at all. Outside the tall windows, the last of the summer light slanted low and gold across the lot where all of this had started, 3 weeks and a lifetime ago. $500,000, Emily said quietly, watching the crowd. And it turned out the only number that mattered was 15. Travis didn't look away from the car. Some things you can't put a real price on. You can only name a small enough number to prove you know that. Emily reached over and took his hand, not asking permission, not needing to. Sam glanced up at both of them, said nothing, and went back to spinning the tiny wheels of his model car against his palm. Neither of them had been looking for this. That, in the end, was exactly why it had found them.